Что остается после умерших? Что останется после каждого из нас? Могильные камни проседают им шею, и всего через несколько десятилетий надписи на них делаются неразличимыми. Воспоминание о человеке может оказаться долговечнее его скелета. Но когда уйдет последний из тех, кто нас еще помнит, вместе с ним растворимся во времени мы. Что же останется? Дети? Останется ли что-то именно после меня? И какое еще по смерти остается человеку?
That intro does not show it, I can simply just say it.
I very much so adore the Metro series of games and books. There's something about those miserable, cold conditions, that philosophizing and rushing around a campfire, and that hiding from mutant horrors that really appeals to me. Metro and the 4A engine also hold a very special place for many enthusiast gamers as being a Crysis-like experience. The first Metro 2033 on PC punished the most powerful rigs and looked generation apart from its console release on Xbox 360. It utilized technology in artful, non-tacked-on ways above and beyond what consoles could do. I would know. It was the second game I played on my newly bought Core i7-930 GTX 470 SLI PC in 2010, and it sure made a mess of that PC on the highest settings. Now hear me out, I'm not a complete masochist, but I sure love seeing my new PC being melted. That tradition is held very high in Metro Exodus in a way that I'm particularly excited about. As is, Metro Exodus's PC version takes the cake as the thing to beat for me right now in graphics. The 4A engine has seen some upgrades, and Metro Exodus runs the gamut of graphics effects and polish that I love seeing in first-person shooters. It all starts with that most essential thing in any first-person shooters, inhabiting the view and position of a character. Metro makes you feel as if you're Artyom in many ways, many of which owe up to the graphical techniques in place. Just take it for when you're walking around, how Artyom touches and interacts with the world, and his own gear, taking out his backpack, flipping over levers, gears, turning on lights, clambering over things. Is your gas mask dirty? Well, wipe it off. Need to know the time? Oh, it's 12:34. So many actions in Metro Exodus show direct, smooth camera translation and active movement by Artyom's body and hands with no telegraphing. Two technical aspects kind of help this out. The body presence by seeing the body and actually having it physically connect with the world. Notice here how Artyom's shadow perfectly lines up with his actions as being done in first person? That third person model is the same as your first person one, and it's not just floating there where the shadow does something else entirely like seen in other games. This is actually pretty rare in first person games. But here it means Artyom connects with the world perfectly with those things he touched, and casts shadows onto them when it happens, making it look just right. Then you have the hands themselves. It is a first person shooter after all, your mitts. Not to go full-on hand fetishist here for DF viewers, but wow, my god, just look at those hands. Gloriously rendered, with veins, differing materials for the nails and skin, arm hair, and a pugilist chunkiness that looks worn. Scarcely a visible polygon corner in sight. And that is just Artyom without gloves. Honestly, the materials, the geometric density on Artyom's hands, especially with gloves, is just astonishing. That leather, whoa, that looks really great if you ask me. In motion, you have something else entirely. As a series first, per-object motion blur is rendered onto the first-person assets, giving them an ultra-slick, snappy feel. It's just so satisfying to watch guns buck and recoil, and Artyom tinker around with his gear in a knowing way, slapping in a fresh magazine, pumping up the air supply, or ripping off mutant legs and throwing them into the water. This game really has it all for first-person animations. That all combines with the punchy bark of weapons and how they animate and affect the environment. I originally had no idea that the guns in this game needed care and maintenance for dirt and grime, In Metro Exodus, traveling through the mud and mucking around in the dust coats your guns and its mechanisms in dirt, which build up procedurally over time with a layer blend shader. The first time I experienced the effect from that, I was most surprised as Artyom cleared the jam and cycled the weapon to make it fire. It goes even further. In my preview video for this game, I might have complained a bit about a certain missing effect, muzzle flash shadows. You might have heard of them. Yeah, I like them a lot. Probably a little too much. Well, they are here in the final version of the game on PC and console, and they are glorious to behold, with enemy-friendly and your own muzzle flashes illuminating the environment and causing a dancing cascade of shadow maps. Of course, all those nice guns and hands and violence would all be for naught if the environments that they took place in and the enemies you were shooting were not up to par. Thankfully, with only really a few minor grievances, I can say that they all hold up spectacularly. Being an FPS, the bestiary is incredibly important, and thankfully the Metro series has never had really any problems here, with uniquely detailed monsters and armor designs being a series staple at this point. This time around though, they show an even greater level of detail upon close inspection, where nearly every monster and animal showcases detailed rippling muscles, sinewy appendages, and a fine layer of moving fur exclusive to the PC version through the integration of the Hairworks library. Even character clothing, dogs, and the like are fitted out with Hairworks splines, not in a density to necessarily cause your PC to explode, but just dense enough to be convincing at intermediary distances without causing too much aliasing. Character clothing, helmets, weapons, anything on characters in general is the area where I think this game makes one of the greatest strides over its prequels. Armor tended to look great in the previous games. Just character faces, clothing, and their general animation set ended up lacking sometimes. Here, Metro Exodus looks to have taken direct scans of performance-captured persons, and if not that, well, then they did an excellent job rigging them up and making them look so. Anna and Miller look particularly awesome. Also that doctor in the beginning of the game that reminds me of a henchman you might kill in The Witcher 3. There are a lot of little details here visible in the characters, in their face, and in their eyes that brings them to life. Given the fact that this game supports both Russian and English audio, the character facial animation is also not that bad. Not as perfect as you might see in other games, but it gets the point and the characterization across every time. These are important things for a game that has you spending so much more time around characters than previous Metro games. Spending less time in the Metro itself, the environments this time are less draped in shadows. And even though the characters look great, and the guns and all that, the environments actually have the tendency to steal the show, and most especially on PC, as I will get to soon enough. In general here, we're looking at fantastical material work that is greatly accentuated by the lighting here on PC. There's dense vegetation, flat expanses of water with a deformation shader for splashes complete with SSR, and a dull, overused, dusty look to so many of the world's environments. Everything looks like it's been through nuclear hell and back. A particular highlight that I love is how they use material blend shaders to add grit, snow, mud, grime, and dust to objects. The one blend shader for dust looks particularly convincing, with corpses or old Soviet war material and surfaces getting a fine coat of dust with proper rim lighting to make it look like they've been sitting around in the exact same position for 2 decades. Or there's glass scattered throughout the world, which has a real thickness to it. And accepts lighting and shadowing information. Like the games before this, there is also an extensive use of tessellation for rounding out bricks and adding that extra height of displacement to many surfaces. One negative thing here that caught my eye occasionally were the surprisingly low resolution textures on some materials and objects, almost looking like they never loaded incorrectly. Perhaps the push to more open levels with greater asset diversity in production, streaming, or texture cache requirements required some cuts here, but it sure does look odd at times. Beyond that nitpick, there are of course all those flourishes that the series has come to known for, like tons of hazy particle effects and dust motes that lazily cling to the air. this time punctuated by new particle lighting and shadowing system found in games like Star Citizen, Doom 2016, or Alien Isolation, where any light can shade or cast shadows onto a particle, really making them feel a part of that environment instead of gamily just kind of wafting through them. And as series veterans should expect, the game also makes heavy use of accelerated particle effects exclusive to the PC through physics, where your shots against concrete, for example, spray tons of collateral damage in the form of shrapnel, or how smoke wafts in and around structures in the environment. Those particles integrate rather seamlessly with what is presumably that now ubiquitous Froxel volumetric fog, which is found nearly in every game out there these days, and here in nearly every scene. Outdoors, streaming into valleys, or in the dank and dirty Moscow metro. Even tiny little lamps have this effect casting fog shadows, or Artyom's pocket lighter as you can see here when I detach the camera from him in photo mode. The fog's density seems to be artist placed and in volumes, and then mapped globally to match with the time of day and changes of weather. It brings out more fog for the rain and snow and combines with screen space and particle effects for sandstorms, making them basically impenetrable to the naked eye, and looks frankly amazing. The only thing really missing from this world sim that I can see from a visual perspective would be big fluffy volumetric skies. Instead here, the game goes for that traditional but visually competent rotating skybox sphere kind of things that we've seen in older games. You can see that most readily when changing the time of day by sleeping. The time of day change is crucial and new to the series, and a big reason why the game's design and look is so different. Any and every mission you can take will most likely look a bit different than someone else's playthrough due to those inclement weather conditions and the time of day. It also has a dramatic effect on gameplay. The changing position of the sun, sky, and moon also greatly affect the lighting composition possible in the game. This is where we get into that massive topic that has been on the tip of my lips since the very beginning of this video. Heck, it permeates every scene here in Metro Exodus nearly, and especially those you've seen in this video. I'm talking about ray tracing. Metro Exodus uses the DirectX 12 extension of DXR to use ray tracing to accelerate a form of indirect lighting, global illumination. Global illumination is essentially where each part and point of the game world is capable of reflecting light and becoming a light source itself. In Metro's case, this technically means single bounce, diffuse global illumination from the sun. So any surface in the overworld hit by the sun or not hit by the sun is directly affected by this. To conceptualize it, just imagine the traditional world of rendering in games as being filled with pitch black objects and materials with no light at all, just materials, models, textures, and the diffuse part of that texture. These are first lit by traditional rasterization. They are then given an indirect, specular, and diffuse reflection through screen space reflections and locally placed cube maps. Then conceptually you can imagine those shadow maps and SSAO trying to obscure incorrect lighting as best as possible. And if you placed multiple cube maps through the world with boundaries cutting them off, you'd give that look of bounce lighting. Well, kind of. Indirect lighting here is very approximate and does not respect many local or even global conditions of lighting. And if it is screen space at all through SSR or SSAO, well, it'll disappear at the edges or when something is off screen or obscured. Or it won't allow objects to self-occlude lighting hitting them. Dynamic objects also do not contribute to this indirect lighting and shadowing here in plausible ways, so they kind of stick out like sore thumbs in traditional rendering. That can look like this in Metro Exodus. There are most definitely many local cube maps placed on this level and in this scene, and this scene is also using industry standards for SSAO and SSR. It is just this scene is primarily in shadow already, so it inherits indirect lighting from those simplistic approximates. Ray tracing then comes in here and looks at that rasterized scene and traces the light from the sun and sky after that first initial hit completed by rasterization. This means any surface can locally light the scene around it, and lighting from outside that first hit has a real directionality to it. If I flip over back to in-game, the difference is staggering. No longer do these barrels here look like they're uniformly lit from some arbitrary direction. They have proper lighting on them and are casting secondary shadows unto themselves and the walls around them, darkening as they move further away from that lighting threshold. They don't glow anymore. Those areas lit by that secondary bounce in the scene also have a more accurate color and hue, respecting the color of the wood from whence they bounced and from the sky where that lighting originated. The last cherry on top comes from the dynamic character model here. This is just some AI I'm about to kill. The enemy model here is not only just bouncing light off of it, but it's also self-occluding and occluding light going around it. That means that dynamic character model right here, which could get up and move anytime it wanted, is casting an indirect shadow that matches the lighting from the outside. Flipping back and forth here really shows the generational leap in fidelity that ray tracing has in Metro Exodus. Long gone are most of those unsightly compromises for performance and scalability issues that we see in rasterization, as they are replaced by ray-traced GI from the sun. It really offers a holistic solution to many problems. It starts to simulate light instead of emulating its effects after the fact. This extends to nearly all and every scene of the game where there is an indirect or direct interaction with the sun and sky, so not really indoors in the Metro. But in those places outside or indirectly lit by the outside, it adds tons of indirect shadows, lighting, and color everywhere, recoloring the entire scene based upon local and global conditions in the blink of an eye. It's real time. There are many scenes in this game where it just looks 100% different due to the lighting from ray tracing. Like here, I was just looking around, examining the game, when I noticed the lighting color in this little hut I was in shifted all of a sudden. Indirect shadows changed. The thing is, simulated cloud cover obscuring the sun here masked the lighting intensity through a hole in the roof that caused that change. Such a tiny thing off screen changed the entire hue of the screen. Or here in this scene where ray tracing adds color from the sky to the ground and also indirect shadows otherwise missing in the non-ray traced scene on the vegetation. Or here, this corpse on the ground is obscuring the bounce light from the outside reaching through the threshold here. It causes a darkened shadow to cast on it and behind the corpse into the train car. This brings up a huge secondary impact that this indirect lighting has for materials. Flipping back and forth between the corpse as it is normally in rasterization, as you'd find on consoles for example, or in the non-ray traced version of the game on PC, you can see what a tremendous effect such realistic lighting has on the materials. Physically based materials in general are based on values and libraries built up that are tuned in programs or based upon ideas that are very physically correct and are run through path tracers essentially. Path tracers are even more accurate than what we see in Metro Exodus here. And here these amazing materials in Metro Exodus are kind of hidden the entire time under the inaccuracies of the rasterized version of the scene. Cube maps mainly. They're not able to come into their own as materials. Ray tracing in Metro not only adds light and shadows and recolors the scenes locally, but it also helps bring out the physically based properties in those materials to allow them to look more close to the ground truth reality we see with our own eyes. Side to side with traditional rasterized lighting, ray tracing shows a generational leap, which reminds me a bit of that time before and after shadow maps, or like turning off the lighting and shadows in Doom 3. It's truly a generational difference, and it's hard to imagine going back to the game and playing without ray tracing, honestly. It just looks so much less natural without it. This generational leap is not just limited to the GI, in fact, and can be readily seen in other areas when a direct comparison is made with the top-end console version in the Xbox One X. Of course, this version of the game is also very pretty in its own right, but ends up losing out on some of the highest-end fidelity and features localized to the PC version. Metro's rather monolithic options make this a little bit of a boring exercise, honestly. As far as we can tell in direct one-to-one comparisons, Xbox One X looks closest to the high setting regarding obvious tell factors, like the shadow map resolution, which even on high is already actually very competent. Another giveaway factor here that is most visually approximate would be that from the volumetrics, which looks similar at most to the high setting based upon how blurry they are and how they kind of block and blob out in the distance. While those smaller tweaks do not hurt render quality too much at all being on high, other lacking features do. While we did not expect consoles to get hairworks, and it does not have them as you can see here by looking at these Watchmen-like creatures, Xbox One X and all console versions instead get a forward-shaded fur based upon cards done at half resolution with 4x MSAA and being cleaned up nicely by temporal anti-aliasing. A missing feature that I did personally expect here was tessellation in the end, but that is actually missing from the Xbox One X version of the game. And not having tessellation can actually have a massive impact on the roundness of objects and how realistic the world looks on closer inspection. But something of course always has to give when targeting a fixed spec. It goes without saying probably, but the Xbox One X is also using the standard lighting model and not ray tracing of course. This of course has some drawbacks as I highlighted earlier in the video, but it's 4K 30, so that's pretty sweet. While PC offers many more features and lighting that makes the game look generationally different usually, these things have a cost in performance. The footage showcased in this video is either from a targeted 60 at 4K output, being reconstructed using Nvidia's Deep Learn Super Sampling or DLSS, or by locking the game to a native 4K. Nvidia's DLSS is pretty simple. It takes a base 1440p image for 4K and then uses an ultra high resolution machine learned reference images to upscale and generate detailed information to make that 1440p image look like a 4K one. Well, in theory. As it is right now, DLSS is not very impressive in Metro Exodus, not really looking like 4K at all, even when standing still and doing a 1-to-1 comparison. Yes, it eliminates unsightly aliasing pretty well, and it might even be perceptually more stable in motion than standard 1440p with TAA, but it's not a huge step up from that 1440p. You do get native resolution HUD elements with DLSS, but that's something you can achieve with the in-game resolution scaler should you so wish. In fact, I would say DLSS kinda looks overly smoothed in comparison to a linear upscaled 1440p, and that's with the day one patch and the latest Nvidia driver that should make it a tiny bit sharper. While this happens, it is also running sometimes 10% worse or more in some scenes. At the moment, I'm really unconvinced. In my opinion here, unless it starts to look more like a real reconstructed image in this title, more like 4K and not smoother 1440p, just use the internal res scaler or play from your native resolution. As I see it, do not use DLSS currently. With 4K DLSS on Ultra and the extreme settings elsewhere, advanced physics on, hairworks on, and using the pre-release drivers, I saw the game at its worst in the upper 40s, with highs in the 70s or even low 80s, but with the game just being above 60 usually, or in the upper to mid 50s on the RTX 2080 Ti. To help remedy that and make it a more smooth 60 FPS or above, setting RTX to high instead of ultra will net you a scene-dependent 15 to 20% more performance with very little effect on the visual output. You can read much more about this on the 2 interviews posted on Eurogamer that we had with Ben Archard and Olez Shushkotsov. The high version of ray tracing here only uses actually 0.5 rays per pixels, with one of the denoising steps actually being done in a checkerboard pattern, thus freeing up resources while looking actually surprisingly similar. DXR set from off to ultra is a 40% drop in performance roughly that will vary from scene to scene. DXR set to high is around a 27% drop in performance that also varies. DXR on ultra with DLSS is a little bit more than 10% slower than native without DXR on. Another way to gather more performance under ray tracing would be by dropping native resolution or by using the resolution scaler, so a reconstructed 4K at 60 FPS is still possible actually in many of the game scenes. If you target 30 at 4K and play with a controller and an RTX 2080 Ti, native is actually doable for many of the game's scenes on extreme graphics with Ultra DXR, but it won't actually hold all the time. Changing it down to high DXR will change that radically and make 4K 30 very, very doable on extreme graphics. As mentioned on the segment on Xbox One X, the best place really to save performance without a great quality drop while using DXR or just in general, beyond native resolution changing, is to adjust the quality settings down from extreme to ultra or high. Doing this will also free up performance while utilizing ray tracing. Without ray tracing, looking at the other settings, you get the following metrics. Extreme to ultra is 15% more performance. Extreme to high is 46% more performance. Extreme to medium is nearly 100% more performance, and my Ryzen 1700X starts actually to CPU bottlenecks. Extreme to low is 138% more performance when the GPU is limiting. Going from Hairworks on to off yields you about 10% more performance, and setting Tessellation from on to off yields you about 20% more performance, but with a rather large hit to quality. Beyond performance here, there's a couple of quality of life issues that need mentioning, and I hope are fixed. While I did not experience it in the same manner, I know from my colleague John Linneman that this game has problems adhering to full screen fully, allowing for distinct refresh rates, and for locking the frame rate down. I can, for example, use the 30 FPS cap in-game on my machine. John can't on his machine at his resolution. The game seems to run in some sort of odd borderless windowed mode at times, where tearing is possible. If you had your desktop set to 4K and the game set to 4K, quit the game, then switch your desktop to 1440p, it actually breaks the game when you try and load it up again, by pushing the window up into the corner. So something is not right at the moment with how the game is scaling. But it does allow you to adjust to lower res in-game without blacking out the screen, so that's a kind of a plus. It would also be great to allow the user to select refresh rate of their monitor in the game. Also, DLSS is only limited right now to 16:9 resolutions, so should you want to use DLSS, say with a 21:9 monitor, well, you can't do that. Likewise, in our testing, we really could not get a consistent HDR experience on PC, unlike that which we could get on consoles. Other users reported some success, but our resident HDR aficionado John Linneman and myself could only reproduce a rather washed out image in HDR, with banding and a kind of neon look to the colors. The lack of complete customizability beyond checkboxes and a generic quality option is similar to the games before this, but disappointing in comparison to how awesome highly tweakable graphics menus can be these days. Perhaps the developers think that users would tweak out effects and ruin their vision for the game. Either way, I always like them, and I always want more tweaking to be exposed to the user. One thing of praise though are the menus themselves from an aesthetic standpoint. They change with the game's chapter and generally always look really beautiful. I would be at fault if I did not mention this last bit, of course. Even though it's not a direct consideration for most of the game's content and experience, the shift to exclusivity on the Epic Game Store is something I'm not fond of in the current way it was done. Firstly, because I would prefer if PC games were made available on any store the user chooses, especially if they are third party to the store owners. As it currently is, the Epic Game Store is lacking at the moment regarding moving saves, accessing INI files, and having access to things like game fora. I really hope an incredibly high quality and passionately made game like this is remembered for how groundbreaking it was, for its pioneering graphics and pathos, not because of its current predicament on the Epic Games Store. But I think I've said enough at this point regarding this game, and definitely enough about ray tracing. If you want to learn the nitty-gritty about how the 4A engine works currently, the future of rendering, and how ray tracing works in this game specifically, read our interviews with the developers in the attached article on the Eurogamer website. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this video and came away with an appreciative understanding for how monumentally interesting ray trace global illumination and Metro Exodus really is. If you did like this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you are already a subscriber, ring that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to talk to me about ray tracing or Metro Exodus, write a comment below and follow me and Digital Foundry on Twitter. As always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.